Masechet Avot is really all about um, moral refinement. The Talmud says, "Man debai lemeh chasida." If a person wants to be righteous, so it brings three opinions. One opinion is leilaf mile de brachot. He should study the issues of the blessings. Another person says leilaf mile de nezikin. He should study the laws of damages. And a third says leilaf mile de avot. He should study the ethics of the fathers. Really, what you have here is three relationships. Relationship between man and God, which is called the blessings. The relationship between man and his fellow, which is called laws of damages. And then Pirkei Avot is a relationship between a person and themselves, Adam La'atzmo. Because Imena Nili Mili, as Hillel says, we have to also, the moral refinement is all about who we are. And who we are as human beings. As later on the Hasidic movement will say, especially Nachman of Breslov, that accomplishment in this world is really an illusion. And the main accomplishment is to human betterment, to become a better person. That's in the end what we take with us. Because the accomplishments of this world, even definitely the material accomplishments, we cannot take with us. But the things that we did that made us a better person, those things we can take with us. So, in his introduction to Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Avadia Bartanura, famous, I think he was 17th century commentator on who writes on the Mishnah, and in his introduction, he says, what is the point of writing this Mishnah, Pirkei Avot, which is not about the laws? It's about moral betterment. Why was it written? So he writes in his introduction something very interesting. He says, since these Mishnayot, these 5 chapters, have nothing to do with the mitzvahs of the Torah directly, like all the other books of the Mishnah, but it's all about ethics and bettering your moral attributes. And you see, the nations of the world, they also wrote books about ethics, how a person should behave with their fellow. Therefore, in this Mishnah, the Tanaim wanted to say that Moses received the Torah from Sinai to teach you that even these teachings of morality and bettering your personal attributes is not something that these people made up. It's actually part of that tradition that Moses received from Sinai. Very interesting idea. You know, Nachmanides Ramban in Sefer Devarim, in Deuteronomy, on the pasuk, on the verse, Vasita Yashar V'Atov, you should do what is right and moral. So, what is right and good. So he says, why should the Torah say this? Isn't the whole Torah about doing what's right and good? So what Nachmanides says is, after the Torah taught you lots of things, not to put a stumbling block before the blind, not to lie and not to cheat. So the Torah gave you some principles. Now the rest, using those principles, try to figure it out because God gave you human reason. So use your reason, use your common sense based on the principle of the Torah and try to figure out everything because the Torah can't tell you what to do in every circumstance of life. That's Nachmanides. So from Nachmanides, ethics could be understood as something the human being is trying to understand after they had a general direction from the Torah. However, Avadia Bartanura is trying to say that these ideas in Pirkei Avot, it's not just this wisdom of the sages, it's actually traditions that they received. I'm not exactly sure what his source is for this. It looks to me that is his interpretation, but it's interesting. It's an interesting interpretation. In any event, Pirkei Avot is all talking about bettering one's attributes and one's relationships and control of themselves and their relationship to others. So the Mishnah says, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moses received the Torah from Sinai and passed it to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders, the Zekenim, and the Zekenim to the prophets, the Nevi'im, and the Nevi'im, the prophets, to the men of the great assembly, Anshe Knesset Hagadola. Now, even as I said last week, the Pirkei Avot, we have two things that we start with. One of them is all of Israel has a place to come, and at the end, the Hanani ben Kasha. And I explained last week in the name of Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook that the reason why these two passages are said one before and one after the study of Pirkei Avot is because in the Second Temple period, the two main issues between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were descended from the Pharisees, as is traditional Judaism, was on this question: is there a world to come, even though it's not explicit in the Bible? And what is the meaning of the oral tradition? So here also, the beginning of Pirkei Avot, it starts with the transmission of the oral tradition. When it says Moses received the Torah from Sinai, it's not just talking about the written tradition. It's even more referring to the oral tradition. Because if not, why say it? Obviously, Moses received the Torah from Sinai and passed it down. You're not telling me anything I didn't know. But the point is, the oral tradition was also passed down with the written, even though it was passed down orally. You see, Judaism is more the oral tradition than the written, as I said before. It's the spectacles through which we understand the written tradition. The written tradition can be very vague. You're supposed to put some sign on your hand and on your head between your eyes. What is it? You're not supposed to be doing malacha, work on Shabbat. What's the definition? There are lots of things in the Torah that without interpretation make absolutely no sense. They're just too cryptic. You should take on the 15th day of the 7th month a nice fruit, Pirkei Sadar, and a palm branch, and the branch of an Avot tree, which nobody knows what that means, and then willows. Now, if you didn't have a tradition that the nice fruit was an etrog, and that the Avot tree was a myrtle, you wouldn't know that those are the four species that you carry around on the Sukkot holiday. But since we see this year after year, and Judaism is a live tradition, so we know about these things. But from the written text, it's very hard to deduce many of the mitzvot of the Torah and how to keep them. So Moses received it from Sinai and then starts the transmission. It's interesting. Moses receives. It's not called a transmission to Moses. So already the Parshanim say, the commentators say, what does it mean he receives? Whenever somebody receives, it means receives according to their ability. Transmission means trying to give everything over. God cannot give over all the Torah to Moses. Moses is human, God is infinite. He can only give Moses what Moses can perceive. Which is interesting. The Midrash has this concept that there is a primordial Torah which existed before the universe existed. 2,000 years before the universe, there is the Torah had existed too. There's another Midrash that says that God looked in the Torah and created the universe. And there's another Midrash that says there's 7 things that God created the universe, and one was the Torah. So, if the Torah is the will of God, well, and let's say the will of God and the wisdom, well, definitely it could be infinite. But what God gives Moses is for this world, so it's called receives, because it's finite. It's only what Moses can receive. Moses is the epitome of prophecy, can receive only a certain amount. And whatever he can receive, that is transmitted further from the divine Torah. And then he gives it so Moses receives it from Sinai and gives it over to Joshua to this king. So what did Moses receive at Sinai? So everybody agrees that Moses receives, from a traditional point of view, Moses receives the written Torah and the oral Torah simultaneously. By the way, when he receives written Torah, it's not 100% clear what it means from Sinai. If you know, we have a holiday called Shavuot on the 6th of Sivan, where we count 49 days from the second day of Pesach. So, but the holiday is actually the date is not mentioned in the Torah. The Torah just says to count 49 days. The Talmud says to us that comes out always to the 6th of Sivan because we count from the second day of Pesach. The Talmud also relates that that's the day which is called Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. But what happened on that day? God declaimed the Decalogue to the Jewish people. He spoke what we call the Ten Commandments to the Jews, to the Israelites. We call that the giving of the Torah, but Torah itself was not given. In fact, according to the Talmud in Gittin, page 60, there's actually a question of whether the Torah was given one shot somewhere at the end of the 40 years of the desert, because only in Devarim is the Torah called Sefer HaTorah Hazeh, Lakoach Sefer HaTorah Hazeh, it's called a book, or was it given piece by piece? If it was given piece by piece, then the Torah really was not given at Sinai. It was given from God to Moses over the 40 years of the experience in the desert. So, but the Torah is the prophecy of Moses. By the way, that's the reason why for Maimonides, even though the Torah says, Lokam Navi b'Yisrael k'Moshe, she'yedao Hashem panim al panim, there never was a prophet in Israel like Moses who knew God face to face. So the Rambam says, not only there never was, there never will be. For Maimonides, the level of prophecy of Moses is an unattainable level by any other prophet. Even the futuristic Messiah will only attain prophecy up close to the level of Moshe, Kim'at K'mo Moshe, but he will not attain the level of Moses, because Moses is a prophecy of the Torah. And if you could imagine somebody on the same level, they can say, now God changed the Torah. One of the principles that Maimonides puts in his 13 principles that the Torah will not be changed. So the exclusivity of the prophecy of Moses saves the Torah, of course, from anarchy. So Moses receives the Torah from Sinai, but according to all the interpretations, it's the written and the oral, and the emphasis is on the oral because the written we knew. But I'm just mentioning that even the written is not clear. It's not clear that it came from Sinai. It came from God, but not necessarily at that experience of Sinai. It might have been written over the 40 years, which seems to be what the Talmud says in Gittin, even though you have other midrashim of Moses watching God writing the Torah, but it doesn't say he brought it down at the time. And the midrashim also try to make points. Interestingly enough, in a book by Moshe de Leon called Shekel HaKodesh, written in the 13th century, Moshe de Leon is the one who brought us the book of Zohar and put it out for the first time between 1275 and 1280. So he writes that the Kabbalistic wisdom also came from Moses at Sinai. And he quotes this first Mishnah. And he says it's to tell you that not only the Torah, the written and the oral Torah came from Sinai, but also to tell you that the Kabbalistic tradition, meaning the secret tradition of the Kabbalah, also came from Sinai. Interesting. Meaning it's not a later development, but the secrets of Torah came first. Of course, you have another interesting place. In the same place, Moses de Leon says, the secrets of Torah came from secrets of the Torah came from Moses, but the truth is even Adam knew about them. Which is an interesting discussion by itself, because if you say the secrets of the Torah came from Moses, that means the Kabbalistic literature was for the Jewish people. If you say that it was known to Adam, that means there's a universal side to it. Something to think about, and I want to continue. So Moses receives the Torah from Sinai, and then it says he gives it to Joshua. That makes sense. Joshua is the next leader after Moses. And then it says he gives it to the Zikanim, the elders. Who are the elders? So again, it's explained that the elders, you have the term of the elders already during the lifetime of Moses. They were the ones who ran the courts, and they're called the elders of the wise men. But also there are verses that talk about the elders. And these elders, according to most of the commentators, include the judges. Because after that we have the prophets. So you have Joshua, the elders, which start from the 70 elders who were during the time of Moses, but continues through the time of the judges. The first one being Caleb ben Yefuneh, who of course was together with Joshua among the two good spies who said good things about the land of Israel. He's the first judge. And it continues all the way to Samuel, who is the last judge. And of course, Samuel anoints first King Saul and then King David. But the interesting thing is it doesn't continue with the kings, it continues with the prophets. So it's a little bit puzzling. What is going on here? Moses is a lawgiver, I know. Joshua was Moses was both a political leader and a lawgiver, but he was more of a lawgiver. Joshua was a little bit more of a political leader than he was of a lawgiver, but he was also a prophet, just like Moses. The Zakanim, the elders, if you're including the judges, okay, some of them got prophecy, like Samuel. Even Eli, as the high priest, was able to look through the breastplate to get insights. Yiftach asked for signs. But it's not clear that the judges were prophets in any sense. They really were more political leaders. So it's interesting that they are passing down the Torah too. And then after them was the prophets. Are the prophets the teachers of the Torah? What about the sages in those generations? Weren't they the teachers of the Torah? And then finally comes to the Anshe Knesset Hagadola, the men of the Great Assembly, who, it's true, in the first few years still had 3 prophets among them, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi, but in its 200 years of existence, more or less, after that it was sages without prophets. So how exactly is this transition working, the transmission? Is it going from sage to sage, from prophet to prophet? It's a little bit, seems to be, of a combination here. What is the meaning of this? So we have to, one thing that has to be pointed out, prophecy goes in waves among the Jewish people. For instance, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob received prophecy. After Jacob, when Jacob goes to Egypt, prophecy disappears. Joseph is not a prophet. The children of Jacob are not prophets. And for that whole period of time, the 400 years they're in Egypt, there are no prophets among the Jewish people. They're also not in Israel. But Moses comes along and he becomes a prophet from the burning bush and on, takes the people out, and prophecy restarts among the Jewish people. And it continues with Joshua, and it continues with even the Zakanim. It says that the Spirit was upon them among the elders. And continues, of course, with some of the people that we see among the judges, but not exactly, because in the period of the judges, it seems to be to a great extent dormant during the period of the judges. But from Samuel, it seems to come back. From Samuel the prophet. Among the judges, even if there are people who had some type of Ruach HaKodesh, of divine spirit, it's not clear exactly who the prophets among them were, if there were. There might have been, but it's just not clear from the text. Once we get in past the time of Samuel, where the kings are appointed, there's the king and the prophet in every court. And we know the names of many of them too. And then many of them who don't have names. Some of them mention the book of Samuel and the book of Kings. Many prophets who we actually didn't know them. But there seemed to be many, many prophets at that time. Till the end of prophecy of Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. And then again, prophecy disappears with the men of the Great Assembly in the Second Temple period, and disappears generally until the time to come. So, when there's no prophet, the transmission is through the leaders. When there are prophets, the transmission seems to go through the prophets. Now, you can notice also here that there is like a wave. There's Moses the prophet, Joshua the prophet, then you might say it goes down to the Zakanim, where they might have Ruach HaKodesh, but they're not necessarily prophets. Then it goes up again to the prophets, and then down again to the men of Great Assembly, if we're talking about prophecy. This actually parallels a Kabbalistic idea, which I'm going to try to explain in a nutshell, and I hope I'm successful. In Kabbalistic literature, the four-letter name of God, which is called the Tetragrammaton, or in Hebrew, Shem Havaya, the four letters represent four stages. The first one, Yud, is receiving from a higher source, which goes down. It's called receiving wisdom. Hey represents figuring it out, which is called Bina, or understanding. Yud is receiving the wisdom. Hey is trying to make sense of it, trying to let it unfold and blossom. The Vav, then, is again receiving, and that final Hey is its application in life. Again, in the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, from a Kabbalistic point of view, each one of the letters represents, it's sort of like receiving, or you might say, the light being drawn down and then being received. So the Yud is a light drawing down, being drawn down, and the Hey receives it in order to understand it. Again, the Vav draws down the light again, even further than the Yud, because it goes longer than the Yud, and the Hey is there again to receive it and apply it. So it's knowledge, drawing down knowledge, understanding the knowledge, drawing down the application, and applying it into the real world. That's called the Yud Kei Vav. And then the top of the Yud, which is called Kutso Shel Yud, that little, you might say, point at the top of the Yud, which is the beginning where the pen starts writing the Yud, where the quill starts writing the Yud in the Sefer Torah, is also a concept by itself. And because if the Yud is drawing down wisdom, the top of the Yud is receiving from the infinite source. That's called Kutso Shel Yud. So then you have five aspects. Receiving from the infinite source, that's called the beginning of the Yud. And then you draw the Yud, that's called the drawing down wisdom. The Hey represents intelligence, which means analytical thought, understanding what the wisdom was. The next Vav is drawing it down into the world to apply it. And the last Hey is the application itself and how it's applied. This represents these five stages in Pirkei Avot. Moses is called Kutso Shel Yud. He is that little, what do I call it? You might say the first spot, the point of the Yud at the top, before the Yud is drawn. That's why he receives from the infinite source. He's Kutso Shel Yud. Joshua is the Chokhmah. Joshua is also a prophet, but he's a prophet among the people. Isha La'edah. And Moses says to God, show me a man who is a man over the people, meaning somebody who could connect well to the people. And God, of course, tells him to pick Joshua. So Joshua is called wisdom, being drawn down. Excuse me. Yes, Joshua is wisdom being drawn down. Then the Zakanim, who are the elders and the judges, are applying this wisdom and trying to understand the wisdom. That's called the first Hey. The next vav, which is again drawing down light, is called the prophets, because prophets are the ones who can draw down light. And then finally, the Anshe Knesset Agdola, the men of the Great Assembly, are called the final hay, which means the application in life, and they're again wise men. So Moses is the prophet, and he's Kutso Shel Yud. Joshua is a prophet, and he's the first Yud. The hay are non-prophets, they're wise, there are scholars. The Vav again, drawing down, are prophets, and the last hay again are scholars. Scholars represent the application, and the prophets represent drawing down. I hope that was understood. Now I shall continue. The men of the Great Assembly, it says, said three things. Hevu mitunim badin. Be very slow in judgment, because you don't want to make mistakes. Ha'amidu talmidim harbe. You should have lots of students, and make fences around the Torah. Now, who were the Anshe Knesset Haggadolah? The Anshe Knesset Haggadolah, the men of Great Assembly, according to the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, there were 120 members. Among them at the beginning, there were even prophets, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. And this lasted for the first part of the Second Temple period for approximately 200 years. Afterwards, much later, we had the Sanhedrin of 70 or 71 members, which was the High Court in Jerusalem. Interestingly enough, the Jerusalem Talmud says that the Anshe Knesset Agdola, those men of the Great Assembly with 120 members, which, by the way, our Knesset here in Israel has 120 members because of the word Knesset reflects Anshe Knesset Agdola, the men of Great Assembly. I don't know how many prophets we have in the Knesset, but in the original Anshe Knesset Agdola they did. So the Yerushalmi says there actually were 85 members. So were there 85 or there were 120? Some people speculate that it could be that since originally under Moses there were 70 elders, like eventually becomes the Sanhedrin with 70 elders, so it could be even the Anshe Knesset Agdola had 70 elders, but other dignitaries were added to them up to 120, leaders of the community and prophets and etc. These are the ones, by the way, who put together our Shmona Esrei, our original silent Amida from the Anshe Knesset Haggadola, and some of the backbone of our prayer book. So the Anshe Knesset Haggadola, when it says this is what they said, it's of course trying to give an idea of what they were trying to do. Because this is the first time where you finally have, you might say you have a court of Jewish law without prophecy, because the prophecy eventually stops. So once you don't have prophecy to correct you, you have to be slow in judgment, which means you have to be very prudent and very careful. You have to have lots of students, because now it's about wisdom. The more students, the more chance that you will have people who will be able to understand and push the generation forward. We all know that there are lots of scholars, but not all of them are so good. That's why the more you have, the more chances of there being enough good ones that are going to push the generation forward. And you have to make fences around the Torah because people are people. And these fences are things that will keep the Torah. We call that gzerot in Hebrew. In general, in rabbinic life, there's gzerot and takanot. Gzerot are the fences around the Torah. For instance, on Shabbat, we have this idea of muktzeh, which is you are not supposed to, let's say if you can't write on Shabbat, then you can't even move a pen, because if you move a pen, you might write. If you can't use your phone, you can't even move it because you might start using it. That's called muktzeh. It's one step away. It's a fence around the Torah. There are a lot of rabbinic fences around the Torah. Aside from that, we also have takanot, which are social amendments to the law, meaning amendments to the law when there are social issues that make it necessary. And there are many examples like this, Pruzbul and Heter Iska and other things. So Siag la Torah then is a fence around the Torah. So in general, what I wanted to show here is that this first Mishnah starts off with the transmission And even the transmission itself happens a very unusual way. And next week, when I talk about again Pirkei Avot, I will go a little bit more into this statement, these three things of the Anshe Knesset Hagadola, and how it continues. Because from this point on, we're actually starting the next Mishnah. Because in the rest of this chapter, it's going to talk about from Shimon Atzadik on what's called the 7 pairs at the end of the Second Temple period. Another thing I should point out, the first chapter of Pirkei Avot is the transmission of the oral tradition, I guess, and the written, all the way to the time of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, which starts chapter 2, and he is the editor of the Mishnah. After that, they're not talking about the transmission anymore. It's really the first chapter which is talking about the transmission, and therefore we have to have in the back of our minds this idea of how the transmission is formulating, and more about that next week. Shalom, shalom.